So, one of the main reasons why Donald Trump won in 2024 had a lot to do with the economy. It had a lot less to do with racism, sexism. It had a lot to do with the fact that he was the only one willing to talk about the economy, to talk about inflation, um, and talk about employment. I think that a lot of the Democrats, they really fucked up when they suggested to the American people that the economy was doing well, inflation is no longer a problem, and when you're a daily consumer and you are part of the working class, you notice that prices are going up, you notice that your savings are going down, you notice that your wages are not keeping up with inflation. And of course, we had probably like in 2022, you know, wages were matching the inflation. But when you actually look at what Jerome Powell was saying, his whole target goal was to stop that. So therefore, he cut interest rates, which then affected businesses. Businesses were able to borrow less, or if they were to borrow, it would be at a higher interest rate. So then it was a trickle effect. So then later on in 2022, um, there was two negative GDP prints, which is the technical definition of a recession. Of course, if you remember, they changed the definition of a recession because technically at that time unemployment was not up. They said that we're technically not in a recession. So, but when you actually look at the unemployment numbers and you look at how they count unemployment, they're cooking the books. If you are unemployed for 6 months or longer, almost all of the time, you're no longer counted. You're just long term unemployed and you're not part of the unemployment data. So, when you're talking about millions of jobs, you're talking about a lot of these AI jobs, you're talking about these big tech companies firing people all 2022, 2023, and then you look at the factors that a lot of other businesses are now going under. If Big Lots doesn't find a buyer, they're going to be going out of business. Badcock is going out of business. Applebee's has shut down stores. TGI Fridays has shut down stores. The owner of Family Dollar is Dollar Tree. They're expecting to cut stores. Target is expecting to cut stores. Um, so when you're lying to the American people by saying that the economy is doing well and they're watching their town or their city, they're watching jobs, you know, fire people, people getting laid off, and you're sitting here telling them that the economy is doing great, it's not. So another trick that they were doing is they would, every month the unemployment numbers are printed and how many jobs were created is also printed. So they will sit here and tell you, we lost this many jobs, we created this many jobs, and then several months later they'll go back and revise the number and it would be in the fucking trash. Same thing with CPI. CPI is how it's called the Consumer Price Index, and it's how they judge where inflation is. So they start cooking the books for that as well. Let's say, one moment you put coffee, bread, eggs, milk, and some other things in a basket. Next month, they'll take the coffee out, they'll take the eggs out, and they're like, well, inflation hasn't gone up because you're still able to purchase bread and milk, but they're not talking about what they're taking out of the cart. Uh, the rental data is also cooked. Instead of actually getting the median price range from apartments or maybe house rentals from Zillow or Redfin or whatever, what they'll do is they'll call a homeowner and ask a homeowner what they believe that their house would be worth every month if it was rented. So, they're not getting the true data. So that affected a lot of the reason why Donald Trump was elected. Whether or not you agree that Donald Trump has the ability to facilitate a great economy, to bring back jobs or create new jobs, that is up for a separate debate. But I did want to touch on the fact that one of the claims that Donald Trump did make is that he would be able to control inflation. And eight times out of 10, the president has no control over inflation. But in this case, the Wall Street Journal did a video on what Donald Trump can and cannot do. So we're going to look at that. And, of course, in the future videos, I'll talk more about, the economy. I'll talk more about how, you know, the numbers are. But right now, to kind of keep this short, sweet, and simple, we're just going to review this video.
President-elect Donald Trump has promised to lower inflation.
Make America affordable again. We're going to make it affordable.
About half of Trump voters said higher prices were the largest factor in their decision. But the president has limited control over inflation.
Anything that affects the economy, how much people want to buy and how much people want to supply will affect inflation.
Here's a look at some of the inflation-fighting tools a president can use. Think of prices as a scale. On one side is demand, which comes from buyers having increased spending power. On the other side is supply, or how many goods and services are available. Prices tend to go down when there's too much supply. When there's too much demand, prices go up.
Where we are right now, there's not a lot of excess capacity in the economy.
Donald Cohn is an economist who spent 40 years working in the Federal Reserve System.
If you add to demand under this circumstance, that's when inflation is going to rise.
And a lot of factors can play a role in driving inflation up or down.
Interest rates, geopolitical risks, growth risks abroad, things that make people want to buy more will tend to push up prices and potentially inflation. Things that make people want to produce more efficiently will tend to reduce pressures on prices, bring inflation back down.
Much of this remains outside the president's control. The Federal Reserve, for example, is independent and uses interest rates to encourage or discourage borrowing money, which leads to more or less spending. For the past several years, the Fed has used rate hikes to bring inflation down near its 2% goal.
They make their decisions based on the objectives that Congress has given them, and the president can be unhappy about that, as Donald Trump was in his first term, and as many presidents before Donald Trump have been. But basically, it's up to the Federal Reserve to make the decisions it wants to make.
What's going on in the rest of the world can also affect the balance of supply and demand in the U.S.
Think about the Russian aggression in Ukraine. The immediate effect of that was to raise energy prices tremendously because of the cutoff of Russian oil from global markets.
Still, presidential...
So, one of the things that a lot of lefties would argue with me about, especially on TikTok, is that Joe Biden didn't directly cause that inflation. And the reason why I say that he did is because we sit here and support a nation that is invading other countries, yet we get mad when Russia invades Ukraine. So, with that logic, we should have, I'm not saying we should have allowed it, but it should not be at the detriment of the American people and the American economy. It's directly correlated that because Ukraine is was one of the largest wheat producers in the world, and wheat is fundamentally found in almost everything, that would also cause not only inflation but starvation numbers to rise. And when you look at Russia is sitting on trillions of dollars of oil, and they are buttering up to Saudi Arabia, and that they are part of OPEC, the OPEC cartel, that would cause oil inflation, which literally affects every one of our pockets, and it affects truckers, which then affects consumers because trucks and ships literally deliver a lot of goods to the American consumer. So for a lot of the lefties that argued with me about that, you're fucking wrong. And then another thing that Joe Biden actually did was he threatened MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the Prince of Saudi Arabia. Of course, you can have the argument that maybe Donald Trump should have stood up to MBS when he was allegedly had killed Jamal Khashoggi, the Wall Street Journal journalist. But the fact that Biden said that he was going to go after MBS, yet did nothing, which also caused inflation because, i.e., fucking Saudi Arabia is part of the OPEC cartel. So when I was making the claim that that Joe Biden was had a hand in inflation, and lefties would say that the president has no control over inflation, to a small, large, and or large extent, yes, they do. Of course, 8 out of 10 times, the manufacturer, the producer, has an obligation to their shareholders for profits, which then cause inflation. Yet at the same time, when you have a president advocating for a senseless fucking war in Ukraine and willing to start a petty ass fight with the Prince of Saudi Arabia, which has a bigger direct impact on inflation because now all consumers are being affected. So, when you're talking about, and also the sanctions on Russia, so what is Russia going to do to avoid those sanctions? They're going to jack up the prices for gas, which all the OPEC cartel usually come into agreement on setting oil prices. So, yeah.
Social policy can make a difference. Taxation, trade policy, and federal spending are three key areas where the president can affect inflation. Take federal spending.
Spending more money for defense or because people need it to eat or Social Security. That's putting money in people's pockets. They'll spend it. That's boosting demand.
So, defense spending doesn't necessarily have too much effect on too much benefit for the American consumer. So when you look at the fact that we invest in infrastructure, we invest in Social Security, we invest in food stamps, we invest in public service, or we invest directly with the American consumer, that of course does cause inflation, but with the velocity of money going around, everyone benefits. Usually wages go up, uh, spending goes up, and as long as wages and spending match each other, then of course inflation is going to go up, but a lot of people benefit. I.e., when everything was shut down a few years ago, the stimmies were printed. Everybody was getting stimmies. I get $1,400. I go buy some fucking shoes. Then I go spend some money at a restaurant. The waitress now gets some money. She now goes buy some makeup. She goes to Ulta. Ulta now gets some money. It can pay its workers more. And so that's how the velocity of money a lot of times works. As far as food stamps, the farmers get subsidies to produce a certain amount of food. That way it can go to food stamp recipients and SNAP benefits. They're spending more. Um, but when you look at defense spending now, you're talking about you're gonna spend, hundreds of dollars on a fucking hammer, thousands of dollars on a fucking toilet, you know, uh, millions of dollars on a fucking, missile, billions of dollars on a plane. No, you're just getting fucking robbed. Yes, some of the workers at Lockheed Martin, some of the workers at Boeing, some of the workers at Raytheon and Halliburton may get a couple of dollars, but when you actually drive past these places in Alabama, like Halliburton and Louisiana, you realize that it's not necessarily directly going to the worker. A lot of times it's just going to the shareholder, it's going to the CEO. And then you go blow up some fucking kid in Palestine, or you go blow up some young motherfucker in Ukraine and Russia. How is that directly boosting the economy? So they love to make this argument that defense spending does all this, all this great things for the economy, but this isn't the 19 fucking 40s. So yeah, and especially when a lot of the American soldiers aren't getting paid. I mean, you're getting $25,000 to sign up. Yeah, some of your housing is taken care of, some of your clothing is taken care of, but you're getting paid 20, maybe 30,000 to sign up to get a bullet in your fucking ass. It's fucking crazy. When you have these defense contractors making astronomical amounts of money that's literally just being wasted. You can go get a fucking Milwaukee DeWalt hammer for at the most 30, maybe $50, but no, these assholes want to go spend several $100s on a fucking hammer, which is outrageous. You're trying to tell me that whatever magical fucking hammer that you're getting is better than DeWalt and Milwaukee? No.
One way to balance out the effects of increased federal spending is through higher taxes, because that takes money out of people's pockets. When it comes to trade policy, tariffs directly affect the cost of goods and put pressure on supply.
If you put on tariffs, the imports into the country will be more expensive. That's the whole point.
What happens from there also depends on whether the public thinks prices are going up, or if they trust that Donald Trump's policies will bring them down.
Imagine you thinking prices are going up. Nigga, if I go to the grocery store and I go buy milk, and every time I go in there, I'm like, bruh, this shit keeps going up. I'm not thinking that shit as in like I'm thinking that this price is going up. I am witnessing the price going the fuck up. Then I think, yeah, this motherfucking price is going up. But people just don't think inflation into existence. That's fucking retarded. That's some fucking dumb nigga shit right there. I'm thinking inflation into existence.
Together, we will deliver low taxes, low regulations, low energy costs, low interest rates, low inflation, so that everyone can afford.
And low inflation generally means that the Federal Reserve is now going to print more money, i.e., quantitative easing, which is Jerome Powell money printer go brrr, and then it's going to cause inflation because now people are borrowing. You're borrowing digital numbers into existence. That's what you're doing. These numbers didn't exist before. Jerome Powell presses a couple fucking buttons. This money magically appears, and then it devalues the actual dollar. So yeah, you can't have low interest rates and low inflation at the same time. That's the reason why Jerome Powell wanted to combat inflation by jacking up interest rates. But the original reason why he was jacking up interest rates was to cause unemployment. And when you cause unemployment to rise, you incur less spending. So yeah, it's just a catch 22 in the Fed. But if you don't in the Fed, then you have to understand Keynesian economics. You can't believe in Austrian economics or the Milton Friedman approach while at the same time have the Federal Reserve into existence. If you have the Federal Reserve in existence, which it shouldn't even be there, but since it is, and nobody's really going to fucking end it, then you have to support some kind of Keynesian economics.
Afford groceries, a car, and a home. Common sense.
As part of his plan to cut government spending, Trump has said he will create the Department of Government Efficiency, led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy.
We expect certain agencies to be deleted outright.
It's very hard to get Congress to reduce government spending. What do you mean? You want to shut that agricultural research station in my congressional district? You want to shut that army?
And then let's like be honest and stop being disingenuous. We have these forever wars, which are literally sponsored by APEC in Israel, that have no benefit to the American citizen, no benefit to the American well being, and we're literally getting shivved, no Vaseline up the tootie, just because we allow contractors to drag the DoD spending through the mud. Meaning, you literally have contractors that work for the DoD given astronomical numbers to the point where the DoD now has to hide how much they're actually spending because they don't even want to have an audit. They haven't had an audit, like they don't even want to try to balance a budget. So yeah, if Elon and Vivek are not talking about literally cutting cutting DoD spending, or at least making sure that we're not getting, you know, dragged through the coals through these contracts, then, maybe we can have a discussion. But I just think that, you know, Elon wants to subsidize his companies, get paid like how just about all of his companies have been subsidized and paid for by the federal government. He's one of the biggest welfare recipients in America. But yeah, so I think that the whole Vivek and Elon thing is really just a sham. MAGA really shouldn't even support it. Um, as far as those two, not saying that government spending shouldn't be cut because obviously it should be, but yeah, not by those two. That's just yeah, it's not
Army
gonna work out.
base in my congressional district. It's one thing for a commission to make a bunch of suggestions, it's entirely another thing for the Congress to do this.
With full control of the Congress, Republicans are expected to extend the tax cuts implemented during Trump's last administration.
Extending the 2017 tax cuts will basically keep the kind of budget deficit that we've had through the Biden years, the 5 to 6% of GDP.
We're going to be reducing taxes. We can do things that nobody else can do.
Adding tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts on top of what we've already got is going to increase the deficit and will add to demand in the economy.
On the campaign trail, Trump said he would use tariffs to pay for tax cuts and make the U.S. a manufacturing superpower.
The key to this effort will be a pro-American trade policy that uses tariffs to encourage production here and bring trillions and trillions of dollars back home.
It will bring in some revenue, and that how much depends on how broad the tariffs are, whether there are ways of avoiding paying the tariffs by buying stuff from other countries, or if it's easily available here.
There
And a better argument would be if you're an American company and you're now looking for employment overseas, what we'll do is this one time only, we'll give you a subsidy to be able to build your plant because now you're going to have to build, maybe depending on what company you're talking about, hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars to build a plant. You build it here in America, we'll give you, some kind of tax deferment or some kind of subsidy or whatever in order to hire American workers at a true cost of living, that the American workers receiving some kind of benefit from it. We get rid of a lot of the H-1B visas. We get rid of a lot of the unnecessary immigration. What I'm not saying is we shouldn't immigrate. That's not what I'm saying. That's a whole nother topic. But when you look at somebody like Tyson Foods that's literally hot firing, 1,200 American workers just to go over here and give those same positions to immigrants with visa holders, that's disingenuous to the American worker. Same thing with Elon Musk. He literally just fired a whole bunch of American workers just to hand out H-1B visas to um, some folks from overseas. What I'm actually saying is, in order to receive this subsidy or to receive this tax credit, you have to, buy you have to build a plant here, and you have to hire American workers at a valuable cost of living. That's the wages that you have to pay. If not, I'm going to put a tariff on this particular American company that's overseas to the point where you will fucking go out of fucking business. And we'll give tax credits to your competitor that builds in America. So I think that tax credits and tax cuts are not the best idea. That's not what I'm saying. I don't think it's a great idea, but I do think that you do have to offer some kind of loophole to get some of these American manufacturing companies back in America. They're not just going to do it just because. So you have to make it worth their while. But at the same time, I do think, this professor is correct that tax cuts do cause higher deficits. So, i.e., more money printing.
Are also other policies Trump has talked about, like mass deportations, whose effects remain unclear.
I worry about the tariff part of it raising prices. I worry about the immigration part of it reducing the supply of labor. I would worry, depending on how all this adds up, the effects could be more on the price increase side than on the price decrease side.
But when you talk about there is a rise in homelessness, and you talk about the fact that we are technically most likely in a recession, going on to a depression, then the reality is that can't be at the detriment of the American worker. I would understand if, you know, almost all American workers had a decent paying job or a high paying job. They had full employment, they had housing, they had, the ability to really achieve the American dream. And then we still had more job openings, which I completely understand. Then you would have to immigrate, especially considering we're not keeping up with the necessary birth rate. But the reality is, you can't have open borders, which if you anybody who ever supported Bernie Sanders would know that he came out in 2015 and said that the open borders was a Koch brothers policy, which is a right-wing fucking policy to get cheap labor and indentured servitudes, because now you have non-Americans with a high likelihood of never becoming American citizens with no pathway to citizenship. They can come here and work as second class citizens, which is almost which is nearly completely difficult for them to ever be able to truly have a successful life by being able to buy a house, buy a car, pay for college and all these other things. Why would you be incentivized to purchase these things if you start to buy a house, then you have a 30 year mortgage, and then you're going to get deported? Why buy a car off the lot when you're probably going to have a 60-month or 72-month term on a brand new car, and then you still have the possibility of losing your job or and getting deported, especially when you're talking about H-1B visas, or you're talking about somebody who crossed the border, being deported. So I think that I will do a long in depth um, video on immigration. But yes, hiring American workers is probably going to who's going to demand more pay, more benefits, is probably going to somewhat affect the cost of a particular product, but that might have to be the price that a lot of us have to be willing to pay to make sure that our society is doing well as a whole. And I think that's one of the things that the American consumer has drifted away from, and of course, the American government has drifted away from.
Even with the White House's inflation fighting tools, federal spending, taxes, and trade policy, the Fed will likely have the biggest influence.
Right now, I think
And really, I just want to say unequivocally, fuck Jerome Powell. He's just a Wall Street doucher. Um, but that's a whole nother topic for a different day.
most people, including people in financial markets, think inflation is headed back to the 2%, no matter what the Trump administration does or what the Harris administration would have done, because the Fed is determined to get it there.
Well, guys, that is what Trump can do on the economy. or at least on inflation. So that is it for today. We will be trying to do more videos. Hopefully, I get more time off work, or even while I'm in the truck, or um, I try to get some more stuff down. But yeah, y'all have a good 2025 and stay safe. Peace.